Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by John Eitel. He's the CSO over at Demandbase. And we're not going to talk about Demandbase. We're going to talk about what it's like to open up a new market for a company. I'm excited because I could talk to anybody about how to write an email. I could talk to anybody about how to cold call. There are only a few folks that have had a chance to open up a new market for a company like Canva and be part of a journey from 500 to 4,000 employees. So John, I'm super excited to have you on the show and to be talking about opening up a new market. I am curious though, it's got to take a special type of person to say yes to, one, to a company like Canva, one, to be considered by Canva, two, to say yes to opening up a new market where you're going to go blank slate in a new territory, be the first person there. Like, that's got to be such an interesting undertaking. Why Canva? Why say yes in the first place?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been, it was a great journey to be a part of and a fun one to sign on with. And, more specific to your question, I'd heard about Canva. Actually, I'm a big, podcast listener. So I'd heard the story of the two entrepreneurs, a husband and wife out of Australia who had kind of defied the odds and obstacles to build this, fast growing, super unicorn startup out of their, home territory of Australia. And so I knew of them and was intrigued by the story. When I actually had a reach out come to me about this one from a recruiting, firm that I've worked with in the past, my initial reaction was, this has largely been a B2C story. And predominantly my background has been, helping startups, go through fast, kind of growth and kind of hyper growth and awkward adolescence phases, but largely in the B2B space. So this was completely, I would say, a little bit out of my comfort zone. But it was interesting for me to meet with the founders and just talk to them about, what they were doing, what they were seeing. And, for context, this was, where they had brought a product to market that simplified, with the Photoshop experience for everyday people. They were giving it away free to consumers, and then once, you got traction with this free base of consumers, you would sign up for the pro platform, which was, largely being used by kind of SMBs, I'd say like, mom and pop shops, the neighborhood bakery, your dry cleaner, folks who needed to create kind of fast, easy, quick content. But it was all largely at this point sold without, any kind of sales team. So this was that PLG motion at the beginnings of when PLG was really becoming something exciting people wanted to hear more about. And so I took the conversation with the founders, just in first part, just to hear more about them and understand, their story. And I quickly learned that they had begun to see this new part of their mission evolving. So they saw folks at large companies bringing, Canva to work. So teams of 30, 40, folks taking it to companies like, Microsoft, Amazon, you name it. And so they started to see, kind of like Dropbox did, a consumer product, making its way into kind of, the enterprise context. And so, fell in love with the founders, fell in love with the problem, really immediately. It's hard not to if you've ever, seen or heard them speak, but they are, an infectious group and, have a lot of energy for what they're doing and some of the things that they're doing that are outside of the norm. So I, quickly connected with them, and it was interesting. They were getting a lot of pressure from their investors to figure out how do they come to North America, how do they expand out of Australia? How do they build a sales team on top of this product-led growth story? So the introduction of, the sales-led growth with a product-led growth, story. And so, for a lot of reasons, it became exciting for me. One, because I love to take brands up market in a B2B context. And so it kind of felt like still that same up market motion that you do. It just started a little bit lower, instead of SMB, it was in consumer, but it's, leapfrogging from SMB to kind of, mid-market and enterprise. And so it was all about helping them come to Austin, helping them, kind of build this new offering, helping them build a sales team that, it really supports all the natural momentum that they had already built with their product there. And so it was a ton of fun. So I, jumped right in and, said, sign me up for this journey here. And, I did this right as the pandemic was happening. So I think that's actually where, the story got a little bit more interesting.
So John, I want to help me understand the decision to go to Canva. It's a huge opportunity. It's a great company, a great set of founders, but the undertaking of opening up a new office for a company is massive. Help me understand your decision process and what went into saying yes to Canva.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was, in a lot of ways, probably the easiest decision. But to your point, there was, a lot of reasons it should have been one of the harder decisions. I think the unique things for me in this, Colin, were that it was outside of probably the normal things I had done. It was, Canva was largely B2C focused, and I had predominantly done B2B throughout my career. So, I came into this with a little bit of, I would say, skepticism, even when I went to meet with the founders, around if my, if my skills really would fit and resonate with them. But fun part of the story was Canva had built this great product. They gave it away free to the masses, and they built this amazing, PLG flywheel through that. It was largely aimed at consumers, but the thought was that, over time, if consumers used it, then small businesses who didn't have access to design resources would start to use it more. And that was where, they kind of made their way into the SMB. And lo and behold, what they found was that people started to take it to work. It was being, showing up at big companies like Microsoft, Amazon, you name XYZ big company. Teams, 30, 40, 50 people were signing up kind of overnight and starting to use the tool. And so it was a great moment for them to realize that they did have a need for an enterprise product offering. They were being largely led there by their customers. And so it was, time for them to think about, like, should we create a new offering, a new product that was, suited and fit for moving into the enterprise space? Should we build a sales team? If you want to go after that audience, you can do it only so much with the PLG motion. And so when does it make sense to bring in a sales-led mission on top of that to really help enable that buying journey, help those customers buy more effectively, and start to use their platform? And so, they were looking to me to say, how do we open up, a new area of the world for us? We were seeing a lot of buying, already happening in North America. Majority of their customers were here. EMEA was next. And that was one of the things that they were thinking about, who can come in and help us, begin that march of opening up some of these new areas and markets. So it really, I would say in a lot of ways, all of a sudden began to fit my skill set, because it was, taking a product up market, going after new customers. It just started in the consumer, first, but it was now moving, in a place that I knew really well and understood the challenges that they were going to face and was able to help them solve. I think the other cool things about it was that it was, fun to come in and think about, like, how do you take a brand from another market into a new market? So I'd always done, companies largely based here in North America and opened up offices in London and Australia. So kind of North America brand moves outward. This is my first time to take a brand from another market into my backyard of the US and Austin, Texas here. And so that was a lot of fun.
It's interesting to me in the journey that there's actually two different pieces that you were getting a chance to start up. It was not just their first office in North America, but it was also their first sales team going up market to these enterprise customers.
It was, yeah. So it was a lot of new for them, at a time that there was, a lot of chaos going on in the world there too. So it was a lot of change on top of change on top of change, and, helping, I'd say the company, the founders, everybody, really understand what it meant to sell to businesses. Cause I think that does take some changing of your DNA to be able to shift and pivot to that audience. I can share all sorts of great stories of things that I learned as I went through that, but, helping them figure that out while learning, like, the nuances of different, kind of markets and things like, what holidays do Americans take off? Like, I actually had to laugh before they hired me. They set up our payroll system and they Googled, what holiday should we give the US team, because we don't know which ones they take off. And so, that first year before I kind of got in place, I think we had some ones that I'd never gotten off before, because, whoever did the Google search, landed on that. But I think just helping them understand, how to get into these new markets, what that involves, what that entails, while learning how to sell to a new customer and launch a new product.
I want to I've got another question I want to ask about what the initial sales team looked like. But you said something interesting in that you've had the opportunity to open up markets for American companies in other markets. So taking a American, product to the UK or EMEA or Europe. I'm curious your perspective on having gone through it with Canva as a local, opening up the local office. Do you have an opinion on, which one works better, if there is an advantage to, say, if you're coming into America, hiring an American versus hiring or taking an American and having them go sell to, the UK market?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to what you just asked there. I do think you need to lean on a local whenever you're thinking about tackling a new market. I think that's something that I highly recommend. I mean, every time that we opened up new markets or new offices, we would hire somebody in market who had, kind of really a good understanding of how to build and set up that kind of, it's a initial groundswell. So in my past, we hired an MD in EMEA, a gentleman that I've worked with a few times, and it was fun to actually, work with this person because they could come in and help us navigate some of just the nuances to get things started. So kind of the inverse of me, I would hire a me, in those new markets as you're going into them there. But then I'd also heavily seed and support, with folks from North America. So we created a rotation of some of our best sellers and gave them the ability to go over and help with hiring, help with onboarding, help with, kind of getting the, initial practices and things up and running. And so you get that good mix of, someone who knows the area and understands the region and understands some of the pitfalls and traps that you could, kind of find yourself in, while enabling them with someone who understands the company and the culture and the things that they want to build. And I think, getting those things right together is really important, because I think if you pick one or the other, right, you over-index in ways that might kind of make this more challenged, right? If you sent a whole pack of, North Americans to Australia to open up an office, I think that might not land as well, right? And vice versa. So I think it's important to have the right elements of culture, that's crossing over from office to office, process and understanding of the product, that's going from office to office, as well as bringing in a regional expert when it makes sense.
I love that. I want to get to sales mix in a minute, but I'm curious if we zoom in on the sales process, maybe in a past experience with WP Engine, selling, how much did the sales process vary between selling to an American company versus selling to a European or English company?
It's a good question. And I do think, ultimately process should be pretty standard across the, the regions. I think that you'll find a lot of times folks will say process is different. And I think to me, process is the steps that we follow, the stages of the, the opportunity, the things that we do along the way to facilitate, someone buying of our product here. But I do think what does need to change is messaging. And I think that's the one thing that needs to be really key. I think, just some things that I've kind of witnessed in my time, but I would say if you show up in London with a very American, kind of, sounding pitch and message, it will land, it'll land hard and not a good way. Right. And I think actually in Australia, it was great to spend some time working with the team at, Canva and getting a sense for how they think about things. But I think they have a strong aversion to kind of sales, kind of tactics, and they feel like American salesy, kind of culture doesn't fit well, and that's why they've got a lot of these companies like Atlassian and Canva that came out that's, really leaned heavily on very transparent sales processes, easy to buy, from. That's kind of the, the key tenets of PLG. And it's largely based on they don't want to be sold to, right? Just treat me like a person and a human, right? And so, I think the process still can underpin both of those situations, but how you talk to the people and how you engage with them, that really is, I think, the important thing you need to embrace and understand.
I love that. Thank you for clarifying that. I don't get an opportunity to ask people that question very often. So I'm always interested to see everybody's a different approach.
Yeah. Well, it's someone who's done it a lot, and we've done it with all different levels of talent. And I do think if I had one bit of regret, Colin, is that I didn't actually do a stint abroad in my career. I have always been, largely North America based with, lots of travel, everywhere else. But I think getting that early in your career is so important. And I think we've sent a lot of folks at both WP Engine, Rackspace, Canva, and even now at Demand Base, we've sent over folks at different levels to some of the different offices. And it is kind of interesting to see that I think they have this like immediate thought that I can just do all the things I did here, there, and it'll work. And so it's almost kind of fun to be able to wait for it and kind of, 3 to 6 months later, be able to kind of pick them up off the floor and say like, okay, you gotta respect and understand that you've kind of walked into a different situation. And so like, you got to adapt and you have to change some of those things, through the messaging, like how you approach things, right? Who you engage with, because those things aren't, kind of always the same. And so it is kind of fun to see that.
I find even, being involved in the sales process, my read on people, whether they are, between Canadian, American, Brit, Australian, you would assume, they're Commonwealth or ex-Commonwealth countries. You would think all these folks are very similar. I find if I'm in a sales process with an American, Canadian, I've got a pretty good understanding of where I'm at and I can kind of read the conversation. As soon as you throw an Aussie or a Brit in there, you're like, I get the humor, but there's so much, there are enough like cultural differences where, persuasion versus, how they share feedback that I feel like discombobulated almost.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I mean, Australia was a great example of this because Australia, from a population size, relatively small, I'd say, but size of land, it's actually massive. Like if you overlay it on North America, it's about, 2/3 of it, so it's a big one, but actually everybody just lives on the outer edges of it. Right. And so you can see all those nuances, even, just doing business with Australia as a quick example, because you have like Sydney, which is, I'd say like largely equivalent to like New York, they're a big city, You got Melbourne. There's a big rivalry between the Sydney and Melbourneites, but then you have Perth, which Perth, it's far, far, far away. It's on the other side, everything there is, kind of mined from the earth. It is a bit of like where the oil and gas, companies have all set up. It's a little bit more of a rough and tumble area. And so I think like if you're talking to someone from Sydney, you're getting like lots of polish, and well educated, very smart, and Perth, not that they're not in the less educated, but it's just more of like they're seen as kind of I would say more of kind of the, cavalier mindset because of the, kind of what they do there. And so, it's just kind of neat to see that. You can't paint all Australians the same, right? I think that I got to see lots of nuances and how they talked, how they thought about things, how they shot from the hip. And so I think you're right. It gets even more complicated as you think about, Latin America and some of those areas, Europe as well. There's tons of cultural nuances there.
Totally. You said something earlier about product mix. And Atlassian and Canva, both great examples of you can use the product first, then go into it. What was the product mix, or what was the mix of like sales, marketing, PLG when you started at Canva, and help me understand what that evolves to?
Yeah. So I was the first sales hire and head of sales at Canva. And so, it was a real kind of fun time to come in. I think they had a few folks that had kind of been, assembled as part of the team and maybe had been hired around the same time. But I would say like we represented, I'd say like probably 1% of the overall population, which is so interesting. And not like any time I've been at a B2B company, right? And so when you're at a, largely, kind of, consumer-led PLG growth company, your predominant kind of like cultures are going to be like engineering and products. Design was massive for us. But I do remember when I showed up, it was almost like being a stranger in a strange land in a lot of ways, which was not characteristic to, any place I'd ever been before, which was, I think, another really fun part. And it's shifted and changed over time. Now they actually have a decent size kind of sales and success team now that, it's been kind of 3 or 4 years, since that time I joined. And they've grown and evolved and really built a world-class offering for, kind of enterprise and B2B. But I would say like now it's representative of probably like I'd say 10 to 15% of the population, which is still lower than most, but it also represents, kind of how they're shifting and changing. And I bet that, if you looked at a pie graph over time, you'd see that slice of the pie just continue to get bigger and bigger, as they continue to see more growth in all these different areas.
I heard you say your first hires were local experts. You probably were the local Austin expert. Yeah. In this example. Who were your next hires when you're back from Sydney, Australia? You're making these hires. Who were the first folks that you brought on to help you build this team out?
Yeah, so it was an interesting one, and this is a great story for any folks that are kind of going through this journey, because I think it's different than if I were just to be, the first sales hire at a company that, just found product market fit, or, was just bringing a product to market. It'd be a different sequence. We had this great, interesting challenge that we had 50 million monthly active users, so we had this massive user base.
Only.
Yeah, larger than some countries. And it was really great to be able to have that as your starting spot. And like I mentioned, there were some teams signing up at big companies, and so the story about enabling, a sales motion on top of this flywheel was how do we take those teams of 30, 40, 50 people that are at, big company XYZ that have started to use the product, and how do we start to align them to our enterprise offering? And so we hired actually CSMs to start with, which is kind of interesting. You predominantly would have hired folks who go acquire customers in the beginning, but we had a different problem. We had customers probably oriented to the wrong product, right? So it's let's get a good subset of these customers that have already kind of self-selected and come on board. Let's align them to a CSM so that we can really beef up and bolster their adoption and get them to talk about 10 other people that they want to invite to be a part of this project, and really scale it and grow it. So we built a quick team of CSMs, which I think was really helpful to capture this natural momentum we already had with these customers that were coming to us. And then we built out, kind of an AE structure to go on top of that too. And so it was the AEs now were, focused on how do we acquire more of these customers coming in, that may have signed up. And this is the kind of cool segmentation stuff you can do, but somebody signed up, the night before that was at a big company, how do we reach out to them ASAP and start to talk to them about, getting them into a sales process and working with them in a way that embraces them, inviting their friends and other departments and, enabling their usage there. So we kind of had, two teams that layered on top of our PLG sign-up motion, one that was capturing teams that were already in place and growing them. And then, quickly the ones that were able to take the ones that were naturally coming to us in the beginning, and then being able to say, okay, let's set them up the right way on the enterprise offering with the right tools, training, so that this thing can really kind of take off and go faster here.
Between those two initial teams, who handled the renewals and the upsell? Was it CS, AE, different team?
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting story too, back to the kind of the sequencing and timing of this. We, I was hired, I went out, I onboarded, I basically came on board right as the world changed, and so, the interesting thing is I flew back, I got out luckily just in time. I got out of Australia, got back to Austin, and, immediately, the world shut down with the pandemic here. And so, it changed a lot of things, back to the commentary about how do you get cross-pollination of people from Australia and US, that was immediately cut off. So one of the tactics that had worked for me in my past life no longer was a tool that I could use, right? I had to build everything here in North America because Australia had shut their borders off during the pandemic. So there was a hard and fast, no one kind of goes between, situation. I think the initial thought also was that we should send everybody over to Australia for the first kind of 20, 30 hires, do the onboarding there, let them really kind of learn about Canva, and then come back and be this great starting point for, how we scale and grow this. And so anyways, this was all kind of just taken away right then and there, kind of overnight. More importantly, we did have a few of these hires made. So in that kind of couple of weeks while I was getting up and running, we hired, say a small, AE and CSM team. And I remember actually having one of our first forecast calls, maybe a month into the pandemic, we're all kind of locked down, hunkered down in our house, realizing the world's not going to change. So we just got to keep on keeping on and doing what we're doing. But this forecast call was probably one of the toughest ones I'd ever, probably sat through in a long time, because everybody's how can I sell a product when everybody in the world is just stunned, doesn't know what they're going to do, right? I had a deal in flight with Qantas Airlines, was what one of the AEs said, and Qantas just laid off 20,000 people and they don't have any planes in the air, right? So how do I show up with any kind of conscience and be able to ask them for, evaluation of our product at this point? And so it was a really neat moment, because I think we actually flipped it on the, we flipped everything kind of on its ear here a little bit. And I went to the founders and said, look, we've got a sales team that you've built. We've got a lot of processes we need to work through. I want to change things up a little bit. And so I was it's going to be really tough to sell right now. This is going to be one of those quarters that, it's going to be a challenge. I would love to see about how we actually show up with heart. We invoke kind of our core values as a company, and we pay the AEs and the CSMs on getting folks to trial our platform here. Again, it was a new product that had just come out. And so, I remember going back to that same team, doing a redo of that forecast call. And I was like, look, this is what we're going to roll out. We're going to give you quotas on setting up trials. We're going to give you quotas on getting, a lot of these customers enabled, and inviting more folks to join. We're going to pay you on free usage for a bit here. And so I remember actually probably one of the more curmudgeony, sellers on the team grabbed me afterwards and was like, I probably should rethink my career choices if I can't sell free software. But back to your point, Colin, I think like it was a unique moment in time, and it was the right call for us to make because it allowed us to onboard, almost like tens of thousands of users for free on the platform. It allowed the sellers to show up and actually be able to have some heart and be able to say, look, Qantas, I know you just underwent a layoff here. We understand you're going through a lot and you're doing more with less. We would love to give you this tool, you're completely free for your usage over the next 6 months. And if it has value, we'll come back and talk to you about a contract, but we're going to open this up to you. And so we did this for about 2-3, quarters, helped us build this massive pipeline that eventually, I kind of seeded that we were going to do a conversion rate metric on here. And when it was all said and done, we converted 80% of it into kind of paid usage. So we got them to use the product. We got them to get value out of it. We kept the sales team in motion. And the cool thing, back to your question, I kind of broke the rules a little bit and said like, hey, let's team people up. So AE, CSM, you're in this together, right? And so, you all kind of think about this. You can do this with small, nimble teams, right? When you're massive, this is really hard to do, but it's like, we're going to give you a combined goal and you're going to go figure it out. And here's how we're going to get these thousands of users on the platform. And like AE, you're going to work on like recruiting them to come on board. CS, you're going to be doing all this training, enabling, onboarding, getting them going. And together you win. And so like the teams felt more united. They were working together on common goals. We were onboarding at our highest velocity at that time that we'd ever seen for this offering. And it allowed us to see like where some of the challenges and breaks are. So like we quickly realized like things were breaking left and right, and it was okay because it allowed us to tighten that up in the moment. It was with free users, which are a little bit more forgiving at the times when you're kind of doing some rough things during onboarding, but again, got us to a point where when the world settled a little bit, it was time to say, okay, let's go again. We had tight processes in place. We were able to actually pull back the 2 roles now and get them more specifically focused on the things that they could really drive. And eventually it became, CSMs were all about like renewals, but usage and adoption and making sure that the customer was getting the most out of it. Whereas AEs were all about the, acquiring of a new customer, making sure that we get them to sign in a meaningful way, and then taking that adoption that they get with an initial department, like maybe sales, and saying, how do we scale this to marketing? How do we, scale this to finance, employee experience, all the way to get them onto kind of a site-wide agreement here.
Interesting. I've had an experience selling free and I don't love it. I think it's actually harder to sell free because it's easier to say, when I say harder to sell free, I mean sell free products that you're not going to charge a customer for, because it's harder to get the customer to bite on the attention.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, do you think this was something that you would recommend a sales leader of a new, that's launching a new product? Or do you think to try and sell free for 6 months? Or was this just something that worked really well because the pandemic, and it's not a good time to be asking Qantas for, any money whatsoever when they just laid off 20,000 people?
Yeah, I share your beliefs on free. I think there's an element of it where you can use it effectively, Colin, but I think like in broad strokes, I would say I 100% agree with you on it. It's largely a bit of this moment in time we were in, I have to say. And it was a helpful thing for us to do. And I don't know if if some of the variables were different, I might have chosen a different path here. But at that time, it was a great one for us to utilize. I will say, to your point, though, just as we know, as long as you set the framework and the structure up and incentives and all the things to align with it, you can actually, see some fun things happen here. And so I think giving away free usage, I was quick to tease out that like, look, we're going to pay you on usage, but eventually I'm going to flip this metric to a, conversion rate, and I think the fear of that happening and people knowing that made it like, okay, let's not just cram a bunch of folks on here that we don't think are going to actually stay, right? Because that's going to hurt me down the road, right? So maybe the fear that it was going to be a potential outcome, making them aware of that. So don't go into it blindly thinking like, hey, free usage is immediately going to convert. I think I teased that out there. I will say too, I also enjoy watching human behaviors and setting the right parameters. look, some of the sellers thought, hey, this will be really easy. Like I can do like 3 times this quota. Whenever a customer comes to me and says, I'm interested in the product, they still wanted a sales experience. And so this one seller, as I listened to his calls and talked to him and coached him through, he was like, hey, check us out. Here's how we compare to the competition. But look, we're giving it away free right now for 6 months. So why don't you get on the platform and I can speak through the sales process, right? Basically just using sloppy process, right? And, he's like, the customer pumped the brakes and was like, no, like, I think I told you I'm evaluating you against 3 other, providers out there. And then, free, I love the analogy of it's free like a puppy, it still has a cost involved to it. Yeah. And so that customer in that moment realized like, hey, like for me to enable and train and get my team's attention to use this product, like it's not really free, right? And so I want to find the right solution. And so it was a great moment to watch and see and coach. And, I think we saw a couple of those where folks were like, this will be easy. And they're like, okay, Cred, I still have to sell even with free. And ironically too, I mean, just another, layer to this, but we also have a big presence in education. And so, the person that I hired to lead our, launch into education, education is largely free. And so I laughingly told this leader that I hired to sell to education, I was like, you got the easiest job in the company, right? You're selling free software, which we both laughed about. Because it's not actually, I would say like his job, in fairness to Jason, who I hired, he's a legend at this and building these systems. He's like, look, even if it's given away free to get into a school system, you need to get through a really rigorous process of approvals. They have to make sure it's secure. People get very sensitive about things, especially their children. And so like, just because your software is free doesn't mean a school district is going to say, come on in and hook into our systems and just start, kind of doing what you want here. So he was like, I have to sell it probably even more so than your commercial reps, John. And so anyways, I agree with you, but I think there's certain nuances, or moments that might, kind of need this. And so I would just say, always kind of look at the task at hand and think about what the right solution is there.
I appreciate that. Thank you. You said something interesting about onboarding. You had to onboard 30, 40 folks to a new sales motion at a new company, a new office in a new way. You couldn't just fly them out and go have the sellers. You couldn't just have the previous sellers intermingle because there were no previous sellers.
Yep. 2,
you can't go and have them in front of the product people because you're barred from leaving the country, entering their country. How did you onboard 30, 40 folks virtually? That sounds easy.
Yeah, I probably would have chosen a different word there, but yeah, it was interesting. And we all, had different elements of like having to figure it out probably in those moments. This one was a bit extreme, I will say. In fact, like, the week after, kind of the dust had settled and we realized the borders weren't going to open up, I think they actually said, hey, ship 50 laptops to John's house. And, John's now taking on onboarding, and John has really been doing onboarding for a real long time. So lots of comic relief to be had here. But this office was actually where my home base was during that time. And, my kids kiddingly laughed and said, it looks like a Mac store in Dad's office. I mean, there was a stack of laptops as tall as you or I. There was, mice, keyboards, everything you need. Yeah. So it was a bit funny and touch and go. Yeah. And I think we, in the beginning, we improvised and overcame like everybody. I mean, I started to do kind of just regular morning stand-ups, which was just like a great practice when you have a small team that's forming in a, in a chaotic time like that. And so it was just great to come together. And, I'd shipped out their laptops, I'd made sure they got set up, but then we would have just regular touch points, checkpoints. We made, Slack channels to make it really easy to kind of ask questions of each other and kind of work through this. And then we just kept evolving and making it better. And I think like the neat thing is, the first probably 10 got the unfortunate experience of being onboarded by John. But, after we got to, 10, we actually ended up hiring, someone to lead sales enablement here in the US who could take on training and build out a very, thoughtful module based, approach. It probably took, her about, I would say 6 to 9 months to get her kind of traction and bearing. But, when she did that, it made the next 10 easier. Over time, we ended up hiring an IT person here in the US because, the Australia and US time zones do not overlap, right? Like they begin their day when we end ours, right? There's a little bit of overlap. But that meant that usually a new hire's experience, prior was if they got their laptop shipped to them by John, and they couldn't log into a system, it's like just hang out till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and someone in Sydney will help you get up and running, right? And if you had a problem, you had to wait. And so, it was nice actually when then we got IT help here, and system support here. We were able to actually run like a real kind of, business onboarding effectively in this new region. And it was so great for me to hand off some of these experiences to other folks because they immediately got better overnight. It was like, I'm going to hold down the fort until we can get an expert in. And then once we get an expert in, this thing really takes off.
It sounds like a very entrepreneurial experience where you're one person, you have 40 different jobs you need to do. You just have to do them all until you get those first folks onboarded, ramped, then you could hire somebody to kind of backfill. And now you only have 39 jobs. Does that sound about?
Yeah, well, it's a great characterization of it. And look, I think for, me, it was a lot of fun in that time, it was a good way to probably sell it to myself internally. But look, it was neat in that it was like, we were all going through this shared experience together. We did have some fun with it. And like the team that built in that first year, they, we all kind of came together, which is a really neat thing. And I will say, like, as tough as it was, and, as many times as I was wearing, hats that I kept switching on the daily or, on the hour, when we were going through all this together, the team felt connected and we were marching in a shared direction, and we were seeing like these great results. And so I do feel like I talked to a lot of CROs during this time who basically said, it's really hard to motivate my team because we've been a team and then we went to work from home. And we're now, kind of been doing it for about 6-9 months, and it's just getting repetitive, and folks are really not kind of bought into what we're doing anymore. They're starting to lose kind of focus on what we're doing anymore. And, a couple of them were like, I'm jealous of you because you have a lot of this chaos. You have a lot of this like shared purpose, and meaning. And, that's really exciting, and it's really helping you, drive through some of this with some clarity. And so, I'd say like it's as much as it was daunting, it had its positive days as well.
There's got to be definitely an advantage to going 0 to 1, starting remote. Like the timing. Had you started on that, 6 months prior, it might have been a different experience. I'm curious from a cultural perspective, creating culture. In a Zoom environment. We all did the Zoom games, and it sounds like you were having the kind of daily stand-ups. What was your experience? Trying to create the culture and kind of set the tone through a Zoom. Like, were there specific things that worked really well? Some things didn't work. Yeah, I'd love to understand that piece.
Yeah, I would say like one thing that's really kind of neat is Canva does have an amazing culture. Like that's one of their kind of strengths right now, and they do a good job. They did a good job prior to the pandemic of like really getting people bought into it because they'd bring everybody together, and they'd have these what they called season openers. So instead of quarters, they go by seasonal calendar. And so every season they would open up with this, kind of kickoff, and it was an all-day event, and there was costumes, and it was a lot of fun. And so thankfully I got to experience it. I will say, like, one thing I am happy. I think if I had more runway and more time, we would have been so much better off. 100% agree. But I do think at least getting some, viewpoint into the culture, being a part of some of these cultural elements was great. And then when we went remote, like they supported us really well, and they did, because everybody was distributed even in Australia. And so they would do these events, and they would send gift boxes to everybody's house, and they had, the themes, and we even did kind of costume based, in the kind of a Zoom situation there. And so look, they made it fun, and they made it, helpful to stay engaged with a lot of support from, outside. And I understood what they were gearing towards. And so I think that was helpful for us to build towards. I think that's the macro culture though, Colin. And I think like then when you think about like doing this hard work of building a new region, there's elements of micro culture, right? And it is like, it can't be in opposition to the macro culture, but it also is like, how do you respect some of the nuances of this new place that you come into? How do you tie in those elements, and how do you, respect the macro, but also, put your own fingerprints on it? So it was fun to be a part of getting to build that out. And, thinking about that, I think some of the things that we were able to do over time as the world became, a little bit more opened up here was that, those season openers were done in Australia time zone. So they were done largely at like 8:00 sometimes, in the US. So it was a little bit of an uncomfortable or, tough situation for the 3 or 4 that we did, prior to getting some critical mass, because it meant that people were staying up to like 2 a.m. to be on a company meeting, right? It's like from 8 to 2 a.m. Would you mind doing it? Bring the energy and bring the noise, right? But then it got to be really fun because we shifted the time, we were able to come together, kind of about 2 years in, as restrictions and vaccines and everything kind of became more available. and we would do like watching parties, right? And so we were able to tap into the culture and be a part of it and do it in like, cool Austin places, and then go to California to be, we ended up actually opening up a hub in California, doing it with the California team. And so we found ways to facilitate kind of moments of connection, through this and build on, the culture while tapping into it. So it was, it was definitely a art form to figure out. And I think there's probably a version of this where, the founders came over and, if I hadn't had that attachment, they might've come over and said like, this is not at all like our company, but they came over and kind of said, this feels a lot like us. You all did a good job of really, matching and mirroring and doing the things that are important to you, but also important to us here.
I love the idea of the sort of macro culture and then the micro culture. And it's not just, Australia to America, but it's, the product led sale or product marketing developer led versus the sales led in Austin. Can you give me some examples of like some of the micro culture that you might have experienced or initiated on the, in the Austin team?
Yeah. I think actually it was really fun to think about, what our elements of this needed to be. We had our own kind of events, and I think they had their, the Canva does a great job of having like Slack groups, clubs and things like that. But we were able to bring in like, ones that were important to us. So like, Austin has a very vibrant live music scene. And so we created a live music club, which was really kind of neat. We tapped into their wine club, and, it was nice to be able to ship wines across the different borders and be able to bring in like California wines introduced to Australia wines and kind of talk about the nuances of that. And so I think that was kind of neat. I think there were, kind of different events and holidays that we had over here that really weren't as big over there. Like Halloween in the US, can be kind of, big, and certain startups get really kind of, jazzed about dressing up and having fun. Australia didn't really kind of care as much about it. And so it was like less of an important one. And so they got a kick out of seeing that. And I think the neat thing too is that in these season openers that we would do, they did spotlight pieces on the teams here. They made us feel very connected. They did kind of video walkthroughs. So, while I was there for 3 years, about 2 years in, we opened up an office. So we opened up our first kind of North America, headquarters. And so it was kind of nice to be able to have like, me doing a video walkthrough of it where it's like, hey, I'm on here presenting. And by the way, hey, come take a walk with me. And it was like MTV Cribs, kind of touring the, touring the office and giving people kind of insight into that. We put in a barbecue pit as well in there, which they love barbecue. We love barbecue, but we think about it in smoking meats. They think about it in a different context. And so it was kind of nice to have some like fun banter and debate about that and, show off our pit as well. And then when the borders fully came open, it was really neat to see, the ability for us all to kind of cross-pollinate and kind of see some of these things. And I felt like they connected more so because they're like, yeah, like I feel like I know you, John, because you always talk on town hall or you talk on, this or that. And I feel like I've been to the office because of that, MTV Cribs-esque walkthrough you did. That was pretty funny. And so, we really did a good job of trying to facilitate connection while, not being able to connect, in person.
I want to drive towards, what the final team and the org structure looked like. I had a question I missed that I wanted to ask earlier, kind of at the top. When you were deciding between like, I'd say maybe marketing led, PLG, sales led, what did the math look like? How did you work out, okay, what's going to be profitable for each sales motion? Or was it just, we'll throw some AEs at it and it doesn't matter if it's a 1 and 2, the AE can still close it. Like how did you work out those kind of rules of engagement, this sort of math behind the strategy of what types of reps we're going to do and what type of sales motion we're going to have?
Yeah, look, that's the important part. And it's not as hard as I'll make it. I mean, it definitely took some financial engineering to get there. But I would say, we quickly established like there's certain things that should have a sales touch and there's certain things that should never have a sales touch. And so the thought was, a consumer like you or I signing up to use the free platform, to create an Instagram post for a partner's birthday probably never needs a sales touch. Like let them do, do their thing. Consumers should consume, SMBs as well. We tried to think about like, how do we do a very scaled approach to that where it's like, let's give them access to webinars. So if you are, my wife opens up a cupcake shop and she wants to have it to be able to build social media posts and be able to create flyers and store signage, like give her access to workshops and training, but never really touch it with the salesperson. We started out kind of setting some parameters of what got a sales touch. And it was typically, what we assessed was kind of like the mid-market all the way up to like the Fortune 1000, right? And we created sub-segments in there, but I would say like we didn't want, sellers touching a company that was less than, I think we started with 100 employees and we quickly moved it up to about 250, just to say, okay, like what are the ones that we really think need that touch, need that help, need that guiding. And so for us, that was kind of the beginning of it, is if you were a company that was 200 employees and above, you got a sales touch, and you were on a salesperson's radar possibly here. But other stuff never got touched. And I think there's other things that we did, we built in, this is becoming more popular with companies like Calendly, who've done really great things on this. But product advocates, which are folks that kind of almost become your SDRs, working through those millions and millions of users, because they're reaching out to them, they're offering coaching sessions, they're talking to them. And if it is a, one person, so if it's Colin or John who signed up at, 1,000-person company, they want to make sure Colin or John, even though I'm just one person paying $9 a month, gets access to some really cool things, gets access to the parts of the platform you need to know about. So maybe do some lightweight training. And if there's interest or signaling, how do you be able to get them to a salesperson right away? Right. So, those were the kind of really neat kind of needles in the haystack for us to find. And so, you kind of build this lightweight kind of teaching, training, enabling, I'd say somewhat customer success, kind of role that's able to kind of work with some of these bigger companies that are kind of hiding in that, in that big haystack there.
I love the product advocate, where SDR, solution expert, SDR disguised as a product advocate. Maybe not disguised, because they are actually there to be helpful, but they're also getting paid to, let's put some customers there. Yeah. That's one of my favorite takeaways of today. I'm curious, last day, what did the org chart look like? Number of people, what kind of departments?
Yeah. So, as I, left, which was about a year and a half ago, maybe, we went from one single, kind of lone salesperson in North America with the dream, building a team, to over 300 in North America. We launched about a year in EMEA. So we opened up, headquarters there about a year ago. So we're in London, so we now are in kind of all the time zones now. So you've got Asia Pac, you got North America, you've got EMEA. So lots going on, but there's about 100, sales and success folks in that area there too. So EMEA grew really rapidly, as well as the team there in Australia. Introduced some new functions, traditional ones that we talked about, like the CSM and the AE and the product advocate, which was kind of like the person who grabbed, the users that kind of self-identified as high potential at big companies. We brought in, kind of solutions architects roles as well. Like, there was, a lot of our product was very easy to use, and that's what you want to preach. So it's not about the complexity, but it was, a lot around like, how do I integrate with, our SSO provider? Like, how do we put this in the context of our sales and marketing stack, right? So having an SE who's able to talk about how we integrate and plug in there.
I love it. And then from it's been almost 2 years since you've been there. I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of it's been a tumultuous last couple of years from there was the COVID kind of paused everything. Then there was the government stimulus kind of rebound and, the associated kind of funding that went alongside it. 2022 seemed to be the year where everybody's like, hey, maybe we should reconsider this growth at all cost mindset. I'm curious what you've seen in, from a buying behavior perspective in the last 2 years.
Yeah, look, and we've talked a bit about this through conversations too, but I think during that time, PLG became really exciting to everybody. And I think everybody probably over-indexed a lot on PLG, and I think now there's lots of stuff coming up around is PLG, all it's cracked up to be. I still believe it belongs in everybody's, kind of tool set in some way, shape, or form. And it largely, to me feels like it's a great tool in B2B as a way to acquire customers, get them to engage and have interest with your platform. But you are seeing, I think some more shifting even on top of that. I do think obviously it's getting tougher and tougher to sell. I've been through, a few of these kind of dips and sales recessions, and you have as well. And so, this one's got some unique nuances in it. I would say this year has elements of what I saw in the past, but I think it also has elements that are completely different. And I think we're finding that decisions are taking longer than they ever have. Budget is getting harder to find. I think indecision and uncertainty just hanging over everybody's head is like the big one that I see. I just see so many deals that we're a right fit for today, that customers, the customer said, I need it, I want it, but it's, the deals aren't just getting done because everybody just doesn't know what's going to happen next, right? Especially if you're in tech, which seems to be really, kind of feeling still kind of impacted and very volatile right now. And so I think there is a lot to this. I think the smartest sellers are the ones that kind of understand and show up and realize, how the world is shifting, and they change their tactics immediately and change their strategies to be more empathetic, show up with more heart, be, again, there for their customers too. I think thinking about how do you grow customers more effectively, if customer acquisition is a little bit stunted right now. So how do we rebalance some of those resources? And I think it's, it's going to make for a much better seller. It needed to happen. I think actually, you've seen this, I'm sure you've heard from many of your guests. The last year or two, had so much volatility in bad ways too. It was just incredibly, out of whack at times. I remember, seeing or hearing this. And so I think we're in a bit of the reset or recoil phase here, and hopefully it'll be better. And I do have a strong belief that tough times don't last, but tough people do. So I think it's got to be the mantra everybody's evoking as we kind of soldier through this.
I love that. I'm gonna steal that one too. It's been interesting. I've seen, PLG, I've seen sales development and some other motions that kind of came out in the last few years get maybe a bad rap because in the growth at all costs mindset, everybody was spending on everything. There's a survey that I follow, and I think it's KeyBank now, but it was Pacific Crest earlier. And David Scott writes a blog and talks about it every year. And when they started following the metric, it was companies were spending in 2015 or 2016, they're spending 92 cents in sales and marketing costs to acquire $1 of ACV. And I thought that was insane.
Yeah.
And then the most recent data sets from 2021, and it had gotten up to $1.67. And if you think about the risk in your business model, just to recover your sales and marketing costs, you're 20 months in.
Yeah.
And I think when you unpack and look at the sales motions that these companies had, they most definitely had PLG. They most definitely had SDR teams. And from my experience, there wasn't enough rigor in the, is this motion going to be profitable for us?
Yeah.
From just period. And so I think sales development, PLG might be getting a bad rap as of late because there are a lot of companies that were running unprofitable or unlikely to be profitable, or to put it generously, long cash to cash conversion cycle, sales motions where you can invest $500K up front and it's going to take 3 years to repay that investment. And we saw a lot of SDRs lose their jobs, probably a lot of PLG, folks in the PLG space lose their jobs. And I suspect that it's going to start rebounding and coming back. And we're already starting to see kind of upticks and from our perspective, the meetings that we're seeing SDRs producing, we're seeing an uptick. I was reading ProfitWell. They post every month. They do a survey of all the companies that use their billing software, and June and July were not good months, but August was the first growth month in the quarter, and it ended up outpacing the kind of whole summer quarter. And so I think we're kind of hopefully at the end of the hard times, and now we're kind of either neutral or on the precipice of turning around. I'm curious. It's a long walk to say, talk to me about Demandbase's PLG. Do you have a PLG? Do you have an SDR team? What does it look like at Demandbase today?
Yeah, I think we have both, and I would say actually before I go into what we've got and how we're helping here, I do think I agree wholeheartedly with you. I do feel like we just got out of balance, and the grow at all cost mindset, really got untenable and unchecked, and so it's time for probably some of that to happen here. And so I'm in favor of sustainable, scalable, repeatable, right? I think those are all things that we want, and so. Hopefully that's where we're gonna go through a little bit of a rough patch, but hopefully where we're gonna land here. We've built, kind of an end-to-end process where you do have, an entry point at some PLG, which is great. Largely, I would say our tool set is great for making SDRs, BDRs more effective at their job. It's one of the things that we really do. You can see with our tool set, who is out there, when who's coming to your website anonymously that you may not know is there. So it'd be great to know that. Who's out there searching, for your product or searching for your competition or even searching for you that you may not know about, right? And so having all these intent signals to layer into your SDR prospecting, amazing. SDRs today spend so much time trying to figure out how to get, email, contact, all these other things. So we've got a sales intelligence platform that helps enable that and really set them up for success there. You layer that on top of our account-based marketing solutions, which allow you to really, as a marketer, make sure you're reaching your buyer and following them with all the touch points. And so, I think actually for us, it's kind of nice for me to come into this with this, one heavy PLG to sales-led growth kind of story. And I think we're able to enable and help a lot of PLG companies. We have a lot of, data, and we are supporting a lot of the biggest ones in the world right now with some of our data and insights and our sales intelligence and enrichment. But I do think actually the world's shifting also in B2B around, it's a account-led growth, right? And what does it need to look like? And, I think AI, which often gets used way too much and gets slapped on everything. The AI washing right now is pretty incredible, but, really kind of helps us stitch a lot of our pieces together. And in a lot of ways, it helps us execute the vision that we've been working towards a lot faster. And so the way we're using AI is really a lot about not the, how are we going to replace all the humans? It's all about like, how do we use our suite of tools, our knowledge of our customers and your customers and their buying trends and behaviors, and really be able to surface the right opportunities to the right, kind of seller at the right time. That's the power that the, demand-based one platform brings. And so, I really do, I joined the company right as probably the recession. Like again, kind of to my Canva story, like I didn't know we were going to have a pandemic. I probably had a strong sense we were going to go into a recession, but it wasn't, clear at the time I signed my offer letter. And, look, I feel very strongly that we're in a great place, even knowing what I know, to be able to help companies go through this, to be more effective, to be able to not just say do more with less, but actually be able to use your team in a more effective way and, not send them on a lot of fool's errands or having them do a lot of things that don't have a lot of value, making sure that every time they're making touches and outreaches, it's met with the right, kind of customer at the right time with the right message.
I love that. And I think to your AI point, message received, you're building, I think we're all working towards building the Iron Man suit as opposed to C-3PO.
Yes, 100%. I hadn't heard that one too. I will borrow that one in return, Colin.
If people, I tell you what, John, it's been great having you on the podcast. I really appreciate it. If people are trying to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Say they want to work for you, they want to, take a look at demand-based, they're looking for advice. What's the best way for them to get?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I try to stay pretty active with the LinkedIn community. So connect with me, reach out to me, follow along, on any of the content that, demand-based or I'm putting out, would love to connect with other like-minded individuals and help in any way I can. If you're going through similar challenges like I expressed today, or, see yourself in kind of a similar position, happy to be a resource.
Right on. Thank you so much for that. And I'll include a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes here. John, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise, Colin. It's a great conversation.
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.